Hook asterisk, I thought I was just being polite, until her smirk told me she saw right through me. And suddenly, too sweet didn't sound like a compliment, it sounded like a challenge. I hadn't seen my friend in weeks. Exams, work, and the dull rhythm of daily life had stretched time thinner than I realized. So when he texted me, "Drop by tonight. Mom's making dinner," it felt like the perfect chance to unwind. The evening sun was still hanging low, painting the street in amber hues when I walked up to their porch, unaware that the night ahead would shift something inside me forever. The front door was half open, a soft hum of music drifting through the house. I stepped inside, greeted by the familiar scent of home-cooked food and the faint warmth of laughter from the kitchen. It felt comforting, grounding, until she appeared. His mom. She wasn't dressed to impress, and yet, somehow, she didn't need to be. A simple white blouse, sleeves loosely rolled up, paired with jeans that carried the ease of someone effortlessly confident. Her hair was tied back in a way that looked unplanned but perfect, a few strands framing her face as if the light had chosen her on purpose. She looked up from the counter, met my gaze, and smiled. "Look who finally decided to visit," she said, voice smooth, teasing just enough to make my chest tighten. I smiled back, trying to sound casual. "Guess I missed your cooking more than I realized." Her laugh, low, warm, and genuine, filled the space like sunlight through open curtains. "Sweet talk already? Careful, or I'll think you're only here for dinner." I didn't expect her words to linger, but they did. There was something disarming about the way she spoke, confident, kind, and just a little playful. It wasn't flirtation, not really, but it carried an undertone that made me acutely aware of her presence. As the evening settled in, she moved around the kitchen with practiced grace, talking to us while preparing dishes. I tried to focus on my friend, on our conversation, but my attention kept drifting, drawn by the sound of her laughter, the curve of her smile, the way her eyes caught the light whenever she turned our way. When she placed a plate in front of me, our fingers brushed, lightly, unintentionally. Still, it was enough. Enough for my pulse to skip and for her to notice the flicker of surprise that crossed my face. She smirked then, soft and knowing, and said in that same calm, teasing tone, "You're too sweet to be this bold." It wasn't the words, it was the way she said them, as if she caught something in me I hadn't meant to reveal. For a moment, the world went quiet. My friend was still talking, laughter filled the air, but all I could hear was the echo of her voice and the warmth of that smirk. That was when it started, the subtle shift, the quiet awareness that turned ordinary moments into something charged, unspoken, and undeniably alive. I'd come for dinner, but by the time dessert arrived, I knew I wasn't just here for that anymore. Dinner ended hours ago, but her words hadn't left me. "You're too sweet to be this bold." They replayed in my mind like a melody I couldn't turn off, soft, teasing, and impossible to forget. It wasn't just what she said, it was how she said it. The glint in her eyes, the slight curve of her lips, that quiet, unshakable confidence. It all lingered, echoing louder than it should have. My friend had gone upstairs to grab something, leaving me alone in the living room. The soft hum of the dishwasher filled the silence, and the faint scent of her perfume, something floral with a hint of warmth, drifted from the kitchen. I tried not to look, not to think, but my gaze betrayed me when she walked in. She carried a dish towel in one hand, a small smile playing on her lips as she noticed me still sitting there. "You didn't have to stay and help clean up," she said, voice light but edged with amusement. "I figured it's the least I could do," I replied. "Besides, you did all the work." She raised an eyebrow, stepping closer. "That's sweet," she murmured, folding the towel neatly over her shoulder. "But careful, you're starting to sound like you mean it." There was again the smirk, soft, deliberate, and devastatingly controlled. It wasn't flirtatious in a loud way. It was subtle, layered with a kind of maturity that drew you in without trying. She didn't need to say more. Her tone, her posture, her calm self-assurance did the rest. I tried to focus on stacking dishes, but every time our hands came close, my mind betrayed me, replaying her words over and over. When I reached for the same glass she was drying, Our fingers brushed again, brief, electric. This time, neither of us pulled back immediately. Her eyes flicked up to meet mine, and for a heartbeat, there was silence, thick, unspoken, alive. I saw something there, curiosity, maybe even recognition. And then, with perfect composure, she broke the moment with a soft laugh. "You really are bold," she said quietly. "I didn't think you'd take it as a challenge." I felt my face warm, caught between a smile and confusion. "Maybe I just don't like losing," I said, surprising myself with the words. She tilted her head, studying me for a moment longer than necessary, as if weighing something unseen. Then, softly, she replied, "Then maybe I shouldn't underestimate you." The air shifted after that, just enough for me to notice. There was no touch, no crossing of lines, just a quiet energy that hummed between us, pulsing in every pause, every glance. She turned away to rinse a plate, but the corner of her mouth lifted again, that same knowing smirk that seemed to read every thought I hadn't dared voice. When my friend came back downstairs, everything appeared normal again. But I knew better. Something had changed, quietly, undeniably. That night, as I left their house, the cool air hit my skin, but I could still feel the warmth of her presence trailing behind me. Her smirk wasn't just a memory now. It was an invitation. "Would you like me to continue with days past?" But the memory of that evening refused to fade. It wasn't just her smirk or the teasing tone she'd used. It was the awareness that followed. The quiet electricity that seemed to hum beneath every thought when I remembered the way her eyes lingered, the way she spoke with calm certainty, like she already knew the effect she had on me. When my friend invited me over again the following week, I told myself it was just to hang out, to talk, to keep things normal. But the truth was, I was curious, achingly curious. Curious to see her again, to find out if the energy I felt that night was imagined or real. The house looked the same as before, but it felt different. Or maybe I did. The moment I stepped inside, the familiar scent of vanilla and spice filled the air, warm and comforting. She was in the kitchen again, back turned, hair loosely tied. For a moment, I simply watched how she moved, the natural rhythm of her hands as she stirred something on the stove. When she turned and saw me standing there, her eyes softened, followed by that familiar, restrained smile. "You again," she said lightly, drying her hands on a towel. "Didn't I warn you what happens when you keep showing up?" I laughed, trying to keep my voice steady. Guess I'm a slow learner. Her eyes held mine a second longer than they needed to. "Or maybe just persistent," she said, her tone dipping slightly, like a secret woven into her words. We talked casually at first, about work, music, her favorite recipes, but beneath the easy rhythm of conversation was that same undercurrent, subtle but undeniable. Every glance carried weight. Every small gesture, a brush of the hand when passing a cup, a shared smile over something trivial, felt charged, deliberate in its restraint. At one point, she handed me a spoon to taste what she was cooking. I leaned in, the faint warmth of her shoulder brushing against mine. The closeness sent a shiver through me. I tried to disguise as a laugh. "It's good," I said quickly, setting the spoon down. Her lips curved slightly. "Good enough to keep you coming back?" The words hung between us, unhurried, careful. I met her gaze, and for the first time, I didn't look away. "Maybe," I said softly. "Depends if you're cooking." Her expression didn't change much, just a small tilt of her head, a spark of amusement flickering behind her eyes. "You really are getting bolder," she murmured, stepping just close enough that I caught the faint trace of her perfume. "But don't forget, sweet things burn easily if they get too close to the heat." Before I could respond, my friend's voice echoed from upstairs, breaking the spell. She turned away calmly, as if nothing had happened, continuing to stir the pot, while I stood frozen in place, pulse racing. It wasn't just curiosity anymore. It was something deeper, an awareness, a connection that defied reason. And I knew, with a quiet certainty, that I'd crossed an invisible line. Because from that moment on, I wasn't just showing up for my friend anymore. I was showing up for her. It was supposed to be just another evening, games, laughter, music spilling from the speakers. But somewhere between the noise and the quiet, the night shifted. My friend had dozed off on the couch after a long day, leaving the room dimly lit and hushed. She appeared a few minutes later, barefoot, holding a cup of tea, her voice soft as she said, "He's out cold, isn't he?" I nodded, half smiling. Didn't even make it past midnight. Her eyes flicked toward the sleeping figure, then back to me. "He never does." She walked over to the balcony door, sliding it open just enough for the cool air to seep in. "You look like you could use some fresh air, too." I followed her outside. The night was quiet, just the faint hum of the city in the distance and the sound of the wind stirring the leaves. The moonlight caught her hair as she leaned against the railing, her profile calm, but her eyes, there was something unreadable in them. "You're quiet tonight," she said. I shrugged, hands in my pockets. "Just thinking." "About what?" I hesitated, then smiled faintly. "About how people can surprise you." Her gaze lingered on me, a slow, deliberate pause before she spoke. "And have I surprised you?" It wasn't a question meant for small talk. It was layered, careful, testing the air between us. I met her eyes, feeling that same undercurrent rise again, slow and consuming. "Yeah," I admitted quietly. "More than I expected." A small, knowing smile touched her lips. "You're too young to say things like that with that much weight." "Maybe," I said, stepping a little closer, "but I mean it." The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was alive. There was something fragile and magnetic about standing there, neither of us breaking the moment. She sipped her tea, eyes still on the skyline. "You remind me of someone I used to know," she said softly. "Someone who used to look at the world like it still owed him answers." "What happened to him?" I asked. Her gaze lowered to the teacup. "He grew up and forgot how to ask the right questions." I didn't know why, but that hit deeper than it should have. I wanted to say something, to reach through the space between us, but she turned slightly, leaning on the railing beside me, her voice barely above a whisper. "You think you understand people until someone walks in and proves you wrong." There it was again, the honesty that slipped through her calm exterior, unguarded for just a second. I looked at her, really looked, and for a moment, the world narrowed to the sound of her breathing and the chill of the air around us. Then she smiled, soft, almost apologetic. "You should go," she murmured, "before your thoughts get too loud." I wanted to stay. I wanted to ask what she meant. But something in her tone told me that tonight wasn't about answers. It was about the questions neither of us dared to voice. As I walked away, I didn't look back. But I could feel her watching me, quiet and unreadable from that balcony. And in that silence, something between us changed forever. After that night on the balcony, everything between us shifted, subtly but unmistakably. Nothing was said, no lines were crossed. Yet every glance carried a weight that words could never hold. I started noticing the small things, the way her laughter softened when I entered the room, the way her tone changed, gentler, when she spoke to me. She wasn't trying to draw attention, and maybe that's what made it so magnetic. Days turned into a quiet rhythm. My friend and I would hang out as usual, but every time I stepped into that house, I felt it, the awareness, the quiet tension that hummed beneath the surface. She was always somewhere nearby, moving gracefully through her world, perfectly composed. But now, I noticed the pauses, the moments her gaze lingered a little too long, or the way her voice seemed to hesitate mid-sentence when I was close. One evening, I came by to help with a project for school. My friend had to leave unexpectedly, promising to return soon. That left me alone in the living room, laptop open, papers spread across the table. She appeared a few minutes later, holding 2 cups of coffee. "Looks like it's just us," she said casually, setting 1 cup beside me. "Guess so," I replied, trying to keep my tone neutral, though my pulse betrayed me. She sat across from me, her presence calm, steady. "You work too seriously," she said after a while, watching me type. "Or maybe I'm just focused." Her lips curved. Focus can be dangerous, especially when you forget what you're focusing on. I looked up, and for a heartbeat, neither of us moved. Her gaze was steady, thoughtful, not playful this time, not teasing. There was a quiet warmth there, something that felt closer to understanding than flirtation. "I think we both know what we're focusing on," I said quietly, unsure if I was crossing a line. Her expression didn't change much, just a slight inhale, a softening around her eyes. "You shouldn't say things like that," she whispered. "Not unless you mean them." "Ido." For a long moment, she said nothing. The air between us grew heavier, filled with everything neither of us dared to touch. Finally, she leaned back slightly, her voice calm again. "You're playing with something you don't fully understand," she said, not unkindly. "Maybe," I said, holding her gaze. "But I'm not afraid to learn." Something flickered across her face then, surprise, maybe even admiration. She didn't smile this time, but her eyes softened. "You're not as sweet as you look," she murmured. "Maybe you're not as untouchable as you pretend to be." That earned the faintest laugh, low and genuine, before she looked away. "Careful," she said. "You're starting to sound like someone I could almost take seriously." And in that moment, something passed between us, quiet, deep, undeniable. It wasn't a confession, not even a promise. It was an acknowledgement, a shared truth we both understood but refused to name. She stood, smoothing her hair, her composure returning like a practiced mask. "Finish your work," she said softly, "before I start believing you mean half the things you say." But as she walked away, I knew she already did. And so did I. The next time I saw her, it wasn't planned. I'd come by to drop something off for my friend, a book he'd left at my place. The house was quiet, the lights dim, and for a moment I thought no one was home. Then I saw her. She was sitting at the kitchen counter, a half-empty glass of wine in front of her, the soft glow from the pendant lights tracing the edge of her face. She looked different, no guarded smile, no teasing confidence, just stillness. When she saw me, she straightened slightly, as if pulling herself back together. "He's not here," she said, voice calm but softer than usual. "I know," I replied. "Just thought I'd drop this off." I set the book on the counter, unsure if I should stay or leave. Something about the quiet, though, held me there. "You okay?" I asked almost without thinking. For a moment, she didn't answer. Then, with a small exhale, she said, "It's been a long day." I hesitated. "You don't look like yourself," I said gently. That earned a faint smile, but not the kind I was used to. "And what does that mean?" "You usually look like you have everything figured out," I said. "Tonight you look tired." She looked at me for a long time, eyes searching, maybe deciding whether to let me in or keep me at a distance. Then she said quietly, "Sometimes pretending you have it all together is the only way to survive." Her voice cracked slightly on that last word, and something in me shifted. The woman who always seemed untouchable suddenly felt human, flawed, fragile, real. "Do you want to talk about it?" I asked. She looked down at her glass, swirling what was left of the wine. "You wouldn't understand. Try me." Her laugh was quiet, almost bitter. "You make it sound so easy." "Not easy," I said, stepping closer. "Just honest." The silence stretched, heavy but not uncomfortable. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "People leave. They always do. And the worst part isn't that they go. It's realizing you made it too easy for them to." I didn't know what to say, so I didn't. I just stood there, close enough that she could feel I wasn't leaving. After a long pause, she met my eyes again, this time without the armor. "Why are you still here?" she asked softly. "Because you needed someone to be," I said. Something flickered across her face, something raw and unguarded. Then, almost involuntarily, she whispered, "You shouldn't be this kind." I smiled faintly. "And you shouldn't underestimate kindness." She held my gaze for a long, still moment. Then, quietly, she said, "You really are too sweet to be this bold." But this time, it wasn't a tease, it was a confession. The air between us thickened, pulsing with everything unspoken. She didn't move, didn't pull away. Neither did I. It wasn't about crossing a line anymore. It was about the fragile truth that neither of us could deny. And as I left that night, her words echoed in my mind, not as a warning, but as something that felt dangerously close to longing. The next few days felt different, slower, heavier, threaded with something neither of us dared to name. She wasn't just my friend's mom anymore. Every memory of her now carried weight. Her voice, her laughter, the way she'd looked at me that night when her guard finally cracked. It was impossible to pretend nothing had shifted. I told myself to keep my distance, but the truth was I didn't want to. Something in me kept pulling back to that house, to her calm presence that somehow made the rest of the world fade away. It happened one evening when rain started pouring unexpectedly. I'd been walking home when she called out from the porch, umbrella in hand. "You'll catch a cold out there," she said, her voice warm against the sound of the storm. I hesitated for half a second before stepping inside. The house was quiet, the rain tapping against the windows like a heartbeat. She took my jacket, hanging it carefully, her fingers brushing mine for just a second, enough to make time stall. "Sit," she said softly. "I'll make tea." I watched her move around the kitchen, graceful as always, but there was a tension in her shoulders, a stillness that told me she felt it too. When she finally set the cups down, she didn't sit across from me this time. She sat beside me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the rain and the soft clink of her spoon against the cup. Then she said quietly, "You shouldn't be here." "I know," I admitted, "but you still asked me to come in." Her lips curved into a sad smile. "I didn't want to. Then why did you?" She looked at me then, really looked like she was searching for something she couldn't find. "Because I keep forgetting that you're not supposed to understand me this well." The words hit deeper than I expected. "Maybe I do," I said softly. Her breath caught. "That's what scares me." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of everything we'd left unsaid since that first smirk, that first teasing challenge that had turned into something far more dangerous. She reached out as if to say something, but stopped herself halfway. Still, her hand lingered near mine, trembling slightly. I could see the battle behind her eyes. Reason against feeling, fear against longing. And then, in a voice that barely rose above a whisper, she said, "You should go before we both forget what this is." But neither of us moved. The rain grew louder, the air thicker, the distance smaller. And in that quiet space between restraint and surrender, something unspoken passed between us, a truth we couldn't undo. When I finally stood, she didn't look at me. Her eyes stayed on the rain, but her voice followed me to the door. "You'll understand someday," she said, "why some things are meant to stay unspoken." I didn't answer. I just looked back once, long enough to see the faintest trace of a smile, half regret, half memory. That night, I realized she had been right from the start. I was too sweet to be that bold, but she was the reason I finally learned what boldness really meant.